Betrayed by his wife Vanessa and stepdaughter Lily, Mason Hargrove, a principled construction mogul, survives a near-fatal scaffold collapse only to uncover Vanessa's affair in fraud with rival Brendan Norwood. From his hospital bed, Mason orchestrates a meticulous revenge, dismantling their schemes with surveillance, financial maneuvers, and legal action. As Vanessa's world crumbles, eviction, fraud exposure, and social ruin, Mason reclaims his life, ensuring Lily's future through a trust fund. This gripping tale of betrayal, calculated justice, and redemption unfolds in Portland's cutthroat business world, leaving you questioning loyalty and the cost of vengeance. Subscribe to our YouTube channel for more gripping tales that spark curiosity and reflection. Emotional support matters too, Mason murmured, the words weighted with disbelief. Vanessa's scoff stung more than his cracked ribs. You're not worth the gas money, Mason. Die fast or heal quick. Just don't drag it out. Before he could respond, another voice seized the line, flat, adolescent, and unfiltered. Ugh, hope you die. Lily. The phone slipped from Mason's hand, not from weakness, but from a sudden numbness that no medication could dull. A month passed. Against medical advice, Mason signed his own release forms and left the hospital with a limp, a cane, and a resolve forged from quiet fury. He didn't go home. Not to that house. Not to them. Yesterday his phone buzzed. A text from Wanda. Just a video, no message. He opened it in the dim solitude of a rented suite downtown. The screen flared to life, and there she was, Vanessa Reynolds, on the front porch of what used to be their house, screaming at the sky like a cornered animal. Her voice cracked with rage as she spun into disbelief, realizing everything was gone. The Range Rover, the custom furniture, the art, even the damn dog. Vanessa collapsed to her knees, clutching her designer purse like it was a life vest in a storm. The emptiness of the house behind her gaped like a wound. Mason didn't smile. He didn't blink. He just watched. Then hit play again. Chapter 1. Foundations of Sand. Steel girders groaned in the morning sun as Mason Hargrove paced the site of the Riverside Plaza, the most ambitious build of his career. Sweat beaded at his temples beneath his hard hat, the air rich with sawdust, diesel, and the sharp tang of fresh-cut concrete. His boots pressed into soil he once believed he'd grow old standing on. At 42, Mason had clawed his way up from framing houses in the drizzle to owning Cornerstone Development, a mid-sized Portland firm with a reputation for integrity and grit. He still bore the calluses of that climb, never shying from a shovel when a deadline crept too close. His crew respected that, especially Diego Fuentes, his right hand, his brother in all but blood. But today, something gnawed at him, a shadow that had nothing to do with building codes or city inspectors. Vanessa had been distant for weeks. Her voice carried that brittle, distracted tone whenever he called. Her text responses read like excuses. Endless charity meetings, new charges to their cards, five-star restaurants he'd never set foot in. Her perfume no longer lingered on the sheets. And Lily? Lily barely made eye contact anymore. Boss? Diego's voice broke through the haze. We need to check this support beam. Something looks off. Mason turned, grateful for the distraction. Let's take a look. But they climbed the scaffold together, steel creaking beneath their weight. Diego pointed toward the misaligned beam, only a few inches, but enough to jeopardize structural integrity. Good catch, Mason said, crouching to inspect the junction. The crack came like a thunderclap. Both men froze. Then the platform lurched, dropping out beneath them with a shriek of tearing metal. Mason reached out. Diego's hand grasped for his. Their fingers touched, then slipped. Gravity roared. Steel, sky, cement, everything blurred. Mason's body ricocheted off a crossbeam, the impact knocking breath from lungs already shattered. Another jolt. Then the final slam, concrete rushing up like a fist. Darkness swallowed everything. His last coherent thought, as pain eclipsed him like an eclipse devouring the sun. Vanessa will be worried. When light returned, it was cruel and sterile. A hospital room. IV tubes tangled around his bruised limbs. Machines beeped with mechanical indifference. Pain came next, deep and sprawling. Later he'd learn his injuries. fractured pelvis, 3 broken ribs, a punctured lung, a severe concussion. His body had been reassembled with screws, plates, and morphine. Through the blur, a figure resolved at his bedside. "Wanda," he rasped. She looked worn, her blazer rumpled, the shadows beneath her eyes telling a story of long hours and deeper worry. But she was there. "Where's Vanessa?" Wanda's expression darkened. "I called her yesterday, the moment they brought you in. She said she was in the middle of something important. Promised to come later. She hasn't." Mason swallowed against the dryness in his throat. "And Lily?" "Supposedly on a school trip." He turned his face to the ceiling, pain pulsing in time with the monitors. 2 days, he thought. 2 days and nothing. He tried to rationalize. Vanessa had always hated hospitals. Maybe she was preparing the house for his return. Maybe the charity was in crisis. Maybe. "Your phone's been buzzing," Wanda said gently, handing it over. "Terrence has called 4 times. Terrence Walsh, attorney, golf partner, friend." Mason tapped the screen with stiff fingers and listened as the line connected. "Jesus, Mason," Terrence's voice came tight, urgent. "I've been trying to reach you." "Construction accident," Mason said, shifting with a grunt. "I'll live." "I hope so, but listen, this is awkward. I was at Riverdale yesterday for a meeting with the Hendersons. I saw Vanessa." Mason's stomach tightened. She was with Brendan Norwood. Silence crackled between them. Mason knew that name well. Brendan Norwood, slick, silver-tongued developer, owner of Pinnacle Properties, and the man who'd lost the Riverside bid by a margin of 2 points. They looked close, intimate, the kind of intimate I couldn't ignore. Mason's mouth dried. "How long?" "Couple hours." They left together. After the call ended, Mason lay there unmoving, as puzzle pieces from the past months fell into place. Late nights, the sudden password on her phone, the lingerie tags he found in the laundry. Unfamiliar brands untouched by him. He picked up the phone again, dialed home, voicemail, then her cell. She answered. "Hello? It's me," he said. "I'm in the hospital." A beat. "Oh, Wanda mentioned something. How are you feeling?" No urgency, no concern, just flat annoyance. "Why haven't you come?" Her sigh crackled like static. "Mason, I've been buried in auction prep. And honestly, what good would I do sitting there? You're getting professional care." He closed his eyes. Healed bones would take months. Broken trust, perhaps never. Worn leather couch, his movements stiff but deliberate, the cane thudding softly against the wood floor. Brick circled once before settling beside him with a groan, his head on Mason's boot, eyes watching every twitch in his master's face. "She'll notice eventually," Mason said, voice low and scraped raw. "Once the credit cards stop working, once Victor freezes the last of the accounts, then she'll call again. But by then," he didn't finish. He didn't need to. The late afternoon light filtered through gauzy curtains, casting long shadows across the room. Wanda stood at the edge of it, arms crossed, her eyes hardening as she studied her and brother, not just the bandages or the healing bruises, but the man underneath. Something in him had shifted, grown colder, sharper. He no longer looked broken. He looked forged. "She'll panic," Wanda said finally, putting away canned soup and protein bars, "when she realizes you're not her safety net anymore." "She's not my problem anymore," Mason murmured. But even he didn't believe it. Not yet. His phone buzzed, a low vibration on the coffee table. He didn't move. Wanda picked it up, glanced at the screen. "Vanessa," she said. He took the phone, stared at the name as if it were an unfamiliar word in a language he'd once spoken fluently. Then, without answering, he powered the device off and slid it beneath a stack of ledgers. Silence reclaimed the room. "She's not worth your time, Mace," Wanda said gently now. He exhaled slowly, rubbing his chest where the bruised ribs still protested. "She took everything," he said, eyes unfocused. "Time, trust, the future I built, brick by goddamn brick. But I'm going to reclaim every nail, every beam. And her, she'll drown in the rubble." Brick let out a contented sigh and nudged his nose against the Mason's knee. Wanda leaned against the counter and watched them both, her expression softening for a breath. Then she cleared her throat. There's more, she said. I didn't want to bring it up until you were stronger, but Roth has been tracking more than just hotel receipts. Mason looked up. Wanda pulled a flash drive from her coat pocket. Brendan Norwood isn't just a liar. He's a fraud. Shell companies, fake investors, unregistered property deals. Terrence thinks he's laundering money through the spa project. Mason took the flash drive and turned it over in his hand like a weapon. Let's confirm it. Quietly. I want Roth to follow the money. Every cent. I want names. I want leverage. Wanda gave a tight nod, already in motion. He rested the drive on the table and leaned back, eyes flicking to the ceiling as if seeing the scaffolding of a plan no one else could glimpse. This isn't about revenge anymore. It's about exposure. If Norwood thinks he can steal from me and disappear into a haze of yoga retreats and detox smoothies, he's in for a brutal awakening. Wanda smirked, though her voice held steel. And Vanessa? I'll bury her with the truth, he said simply. Not vindictively, surgically. She'll lose the house, the money, the charities, the fake respect she's clawed her way into. And Lily? He paused, jaw tight. What about Lily? Wanda asked gently. She's still a kid, still got time to figure out who she wants to be, he said, though his voice betrayed the ache beneath the words. But I won't let her lie to herself about her mother. Or about me. Wanda crossed the room, placing a hand on his shoulder. You don't owe that girl anything after what she said. She's still part of the mess Vanessa made, Mason replied. But I'm not going to be another person who abandons her. She'll know the truth. All of it. Then the rest is up to her. Outside, dusk had begun its slow descent, cloaking the modest condo in a palette of deepening blues and grays. In the hush that followed, Mason leaned forward, lit only by the golden spill of the kitchen light. Tomorrow, he said, I want Roth to start phase 2. We take apart Norwood's empire, brick by brick. I want him stripped of his mask before the board meeting next quarter. You want to do this before the board votes on the Rivermark project? They trust me, but trust fades fast in silence. I need to be back before they start listening to Norwood. Wanda nodded, the wheels in her head turning. And if Vanessa tries to play the victim? Mason looked her dead in the eye. Then she'll learn what it feels like to be forgotten. The room fell quiet again, save for the rhythmic pulse of bricks breathing and the distant hum of passing cars. Mason tilted his head back, eyes drifting shut, the weight of exhaustion mingling with resolve. He wasn't healing. He was recalibrating. And soon, very soon, the reckoning would begin. A slow groan pushed from Mason Hargrove's throat as he shifted upright on the couch, his body still rebelling against the strain of healing bones and bruised pride. Pain was a welcome companion now, one that reminded him he was still here, still fighting. What's the latest on the company? He rasped. Wanda Hargrove didn't look up from her tablet. Oliver followed the plan down to the last detail, she said, swiping with precision. The contingency team holds full decision-making authority. On paper, you're on medical leave with minimal engagement. Mason gave a dry smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. But in reality, I'm still pulling the strings, he finished, voice laced with quiet steel. Cornerstone Development wasn't just a business. It was his legacy, forged over 15 relentless years. He'd navigated through economic storms and ruthless competition, brick by brick, blueprint by blueprint. Every contingency he'd ever drafted in case of disaster, be it financial, industrial, or personal, was now shielding him from the implosion Vanessa had tried to trigger. The asset transfers are finalized, Wanda continued, turning the screen toward him. Everything's tucked safely offshore. Property deeds are backdated and clean. Legal, strategic, and out of her reach. Victor's been meticulous. And surveillance? Mason's tone dropped into the register of a commander at war. A few taps later, the tablet screen filled with a grainy feed from the hidden cameras placed throughout the Hargrove residence. Mason's jaw clenched as Vanessa appeared in the kitchen. Satin robe, phone pressed tight to her ear, pacing with serpentine energy. He adjusted the volume, letting her voice slice through the silence. It doesn't matter where he is, Brendan, she hissed. This is our window. He's out of the way, and Rejuvenate can move forward without his interference. I can manage the minor forms. His signature's easy enough to replicate. Terrence Walsh still hasn't returned my calls about the loan. Mason muted the feed, disgust curling in his gut. Has she touched any of the protected accounts? He asked. Wanda arched a brow. Not yet. Still charging up a storm. Nordstrom got 900 out of her yesterday. A humorless smile tugged at Mason's lips. Let her keep going. Vanessa still had access to their joint checking and her personal credit cards. What she didn't know, what she'd never see coming, was that the real money was gone. Retirement savings, investment portfolios, even the rainy day emergency fund had been quietly rerouted into armored accounts well beyond her grasp. She was burning fuel from a tank already bone dry. Over the next 2 weeks, Mason transformed the modest safe house into a command center. Each day was a campaign, each night a strategy session. He moved like a ghost, invisible but present, directing Oliver at Cornerstone to keep operations humming as if nothing had changed, while positioning Victor to monitor every flicker in Vanessa's spending habits. Terrence Walsh, his attorney, began threading the legal net that would drop the moment Mason gave the signal. And Roth, quiet, relentless Roth, was collecting the kind of truths that couldn't be spun. It wasn't just the affair with Brenda Norwood anymore. No, Vanessa's sins ran deeper. Roth, in a secure video call, laid out the evidence in methodical strokes. They've been flipping distressed properties using a shell game, Roth explained, forwarding files to Mason's encrypted screen. Norwood buys them dirt cheap. Vanessa's charity renovates them, but only on paper. They inflate the invoices, then file false insurance claims for fabricated renovation damage. Payouts get funneled through another company they control. Mason scanned the forged documents, connections falling into place like poisoned beads on a string. How long? 2 years at least, Ross said. They started small, but rejuvenate? That's their crown jewel. They need your name, your reputation, your money, but once it's built, the scam runs itself. 2 years. That meant from nearly the beginning of their marriage, Vanessa had been weaving this web. Every kiss, every shared holiday, every whispered word in the dark. An act, a performance, and he had been the mark. Keep going, Mason said, voice flinty. Every call, every shell company, every dollar. I want it airtight. Day 28 after the collapse came with no fanfare, no hesitation. Just a text to Wanda, brief and final. Time to come home. The rain smeared across the windshield in silvery ribbons as Vanessa Reynolds Hargrove surged through Portland's traffic, the tension in her knuckles pale against the steering wheel. Her heart galloped beneath her silk blouse. She'd finally caved this morning, visited the hospital where Mason was supposedly recovering, only to discover he'd discharged himself nearly a month ago. No forwarding information, no explanation, just gone. Wanda had answered her panicked call with biting frost. Now you care? How convenient. Something was wrong, something deeper than she'd anticipated. Mason was supposed to be injured, distracted, pliable. Instead, he'd vanished, and their accounts had started behaving strangely. An attempt to pull funds for spa permits had been flatly denied. The business account that once overflowed now declared insufficient funds. She couldn't breathe right. Her Mercedes screeched into the driveway. No Mason's truck, no welcoming bark from Brick, the dog that never left his side. Only silence, dense and unnatural. She stepped inside and froze. The air felt evacuated, like a stage after the curtain falls. The house was too quiet, too empty. Room by room, the absences grew. Mason's books, gone. His toolbox vanished. The record player he'd spent weekends refurbishing, now a ghost. Even Brick's bed sat abandoned. In the office, the wall safe stood wide open, gutted. No, 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 she whispered, racing to the bedroom. The closet yawned back at her, hollow. Bare hangers. The nightstand was wiped clean. No glasses, no paperback thrillers, no lotion for his calloused hands. In the bathroom, the toothbrush holder was reduced to one lonely stem. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't a retreat. He had erased himself. She collapsed on the bed, hands shaking as she dialed Brendan. He's gone, she gasped. He took everything. Calm down, he said a trace too sharply. Where would he go? I don't know. Something's wrong with the accounts. I need to check them again. Something's not right. She hung up and launched the desktop in the office. 3 incorrect password attempts later, A cold message blinked back at her. This account has been suspended. Please contact your system administrator. Son of a... she hissed, yanking her laptop open. One desperate login later, the banking website loaded. Her throat constricted. The joint checking account sat at 2,732 taken, just enough to avoid alerts, just enough to keep her from realizing the truth until it was too late. The savings account? Zero. An abyss. Mason hadn't just left. He had dismantled her empire brick by brick, and she hadn't seen it coming. The cursor blinked as the error message reappeared. Okihiro, access denied. Vanessa Reynolds' fingers trembled over the keyboard, her manicured nails clicking against the keys with growing urgency. A sheen of sweat misted her brow. She hit refresh again, a silent prayer forming on her lips. Nothing. The portfolio login refused to yield. With forced composure, she reached for her phone and dialed the bank's customer service line, masking her panic behind a falsely sweet tone. After enduring the monotony of security questions, she finally asked, "Could you check the status of the Hargrove savings account, please?" A chipper voice replied, "That account was closed 3 weeks ago, Mrs. Hargrove. The funds were transferred to another institution. Unfortunately, I don't have visibility on the receiving party." Her breath hitched. "That's impossible. I didn't authorize that." The transfer was approved by the primary account holder, Mr. Mason Hargrove. Of course, primary account holder. She had never insisted on being listed jointly. Why would she? Mason had always handled the finances, never so much as flinching at her spending habits. Her lip curled. Foolish oversight. No, strategic negligence. She ended the call without a word, the bank rep's politeness twisting the knife deeper. With a mechanical rhythm, she pivoted to damage control, trying an online purchase. Declined. A second attempt. Declined. She grabbed her wallet, digging out the last option, an old personal card from the days before she became Mrs. Hargrove. It worked barely. A meager $5,000 limit, most of it already tapped out. Then her phone vibrated. A text. Unknown number. Front porch. "You should see this." Brows furrowed, Vanessa moved to the door, the polished hardwood suddenly echoing beneath her heels like a courtroom floor. Outside, rain whispered on the overhang as she spotted a plain manila envelope resting like a dare on the welcome mat. She snatched it up with caution. Inside, a single sheet of paper, dry, clinical, brutal, a property transfer filed with Multnomah County. She read and reread it, disbelieving. Ownership of the home had been transferred 3 years ago to an LLC, Cornerstone Holdings, Mason's company. He was merely a tenant now. The legal owner? The business entity she'd always treated as a shadowy background prop. Mason had cloaked their life in protections from the start, quietly, shrewdly. Her hands began to shake again, not from fear this time, but from the volatile rage bubbling beneath her skin. He played me. The con woman. Outconned. Her phone rang again. "Lily, Mom, the emergency card you gave me doesn't work." The vending machine rejected it. Then the ATM said account restricted. Vanessa's voice slipped into a soft coo. "It's fine, honey. Just a glitch with the bank. I'll pick you up in 20 minutes. She hung up, jaw clenched, heart pounding. She stood in the middle of the hallway, once hers, now alien. Her mind spiraled. She needed Mason. She needed leverage. She needed to reverse this disaster before it spiraled into full collapse. The Rejuvenate deal? Gone. Brendan, furious. She passed the living room, her pace halting as a subtle void caught her attention. A single absence on the mantel where a photo once stood. The three of them at the coast, brick digging ecstatically at their feet, all of them smiling, her, Mason, and Lily, like some crafted illusion of family. It had been Mason's favorite. Now it was gone. Not recently, there was no dust outline. She hadn't even noticed when he'd taken it. A cold gust of realization swept through her, and as the rain thickened, drumming on the windows like judgment, she understood with creeping horror. This house, this life, this identity, none of it was hers anymore. 3 days earlier, Mason Hargrove had slipped into the seat of his command center with quiet resolve, the monitors before him casting a pale glow in the darkened safe house. From their estate's security system, A measure once sold as precaution during travel, he now watched his wife unravel. He saw it all. Her frantic calls to Brendan Norwood, her fingers rifling through drawers like claws, desperation mounting with every unanswered question. She broke into his files. She sobbed at her reflection. She screamed into her wine glass and passed out on the couch. Beside him, Wanda Hargrove exhaled, her expression carved in contempt. "She's still looking for your weak points," she muttered, and ignoring her own rot. Classic narcissist. Mason gave a small nod, eyes never leaving the screen as he absently scratched behind Brick's ears. "She won't find any. Not anymore." On the third day, he made the call. "Lover, initiate Operation Clearbooks." At Cornerstone Developments HQ, the hum of printers and keystrokes filled the air as a team of forensic accountants pored over files with surgical focus. Ostensibly, it was a routine audit. In reality, it was a scalpel slicing into the diseased tissue of Vanessa's charities. By mid-afternoon, the report was airtight. Padded invoices, ghost contractors, circular payments funneled through shell vendors to wash insurance funds clean. Each fraudulent layer had been carefully cataloged thanks to Roth's investigations. Concurrently, Terrence Walsh filed a barrage of legal documents: a divorce petition citing abandonment and infidelity, an emergency injunction to freeze all marital assets tied to Vanessa, and a detailed complaint with the state insurance commissioner. Then came the press offensive. A thick envelope landed on the desk of a Portland Tribune editor. Photos of Vanessa and Brendan in compromising embraces, transaction histories, and a damning chronology of their charity ventures. The anonymous sender left no room for interpretation. The golden couple was a front for a multi-million-dollar fraud machine. By nightfall, the storm Mason had orchestrated broke in full. Vanessa's phone exploded with fury. The bank confirmed the freeze. Brendan demanded answers. The Tribune requested comment. And then, the final blow, Terrence Walsh appeared at her doorstep, divorce summons in hand. Through his screen, Mason watched her collapse onto the sofa, the façade finally cracking. She clutched her head, shoulders heaving. Wanda watched too, arms folded. "You really thought of everything," she said. "Not quite," Mason murmured, turning to a separate screen. New footage. Lily, taken that morning, at school, withdrawn, isolated, a ghost of the bright girl he remembered. She checked her phone over and over, hunched as if bracing against an invisible blow. Roth's report confirmed the whispers. Lily, caught in the fallout, whispered about by classmates. Unlike Vanessa, Lily's betrayal hadn't been cold and strategic. Her "I hope you die" had been jagged, teenage, emotional, a cry of misplaced allegiance. But Mason hadn't forgotten, nor forgiven. Yet his plans for her were different. Shame had already begun to swirl around Lily like a cold wind through broken glass. Rumors of her mother's entanglement with Brendan Norwood seeped from PTA whispers into school hallways, staining the girl's name before she could defend herself. "She needs to learn there are consequences," Wanda said, her tone flint hard, no trace of sympathy softening its edge. Mason didn't look up right away. His gaze lingered on the photo of Lily, pinned at the corner of his desk, a moment of candid joy long gone. "She's 17, he said quietly, still tangled in her mother's lies. I'm not excusing what she said, but..." He exhaled slow and steady. "She deserves the chance to find her own truth." He opened a draft email addressed to Lily's school counselor. Each word was measured, deliberate, outlining not just concerns about Lily's increasingly volatile home life, but also a plea for vigilance, for intervention. Attached to the message was a document Vanessa could never touch: a prepaid college fund under Lily's name, airtight, sealed with a condition. It would unlock only upon graduation. Wanda's voice cracked through the silence like a whip. "You're still protecting her? After she sided with that woman?" "I'm giving her what her mother never would, an escape hatch. Whether she climbs through it or not, that's her choice." Without hesitation, Mason hit send. The surveillance feed on the second monitor flickered, pulling his attention back to the theater of betrayal unfolding in real time. Vanessa stood in the sun-drenched living room, phone pressed to her cheek, her posture taut with desperation melting into cold resolve. Mason dialed up the volume. "It doesn't matter what they think they know," she murmured to Brendan Norwood, her voice a snake sliding through grass. "We stay aligned. The charity work was legitimate. The meetings, business development. Your lawyer can spin this better than that bargain bin attorney Mason's using." A bitter smile tugged at Mason's lips. Terrence Walsh, a discount lawyer? The man was one of Portland's most formidable legal strategists. Vanessa had never once bothered to learn how Mason truly operated. To her, he was always just the builder, solid, simple, someone to outmaneuver. "Let her believe she still holds the reins," Mason muttered. "Tomorrow she learns what it means to lose everything." The next morning, the storm arrived with ink-black headlines. Charity fraud investigation targets prominent organizer and developer. The Portland Tribune's front page thundered across the city like a clap of reckoning. Below the headline, two grainy images spoke volumes. Vanessa and Brendan, emerging from a hotel, limbs too close, faces flushed with something far from professionalism. The article flayed them. Accusations of insurance fraud, diverted charitable funds, whispers of tax evasion. All sourced from an anonymous dossier. By 10 a.m., Vanessa had been ejected from 3 charity boards. By noon, the state insurance commissioner was circling Pinnacle Properties. And by mid-afternoon, Brendan's once proud investors were scrambling to distance themselves. From Cornerstone's seldom-used satellite office across town, his temporary war room, Mason watched it all unfold. The main headquarters remained a decoy. Operations continued as usual, unaware their general had shifted to the shadows. His ribs still ached from the accident, but his plan unfurled like clockwork. Justice, mechanical and unrelenting. Oliver entered, arms laden with permit forms. "Norwood's attorney called again," he reported. "They want to release a joint statement, something to clear up the misunderstanding." Mason didn't lift his eyes from the blueprints. "No response," he said flatly. "Also, the bank confirmed the lien on Riverside Heights has been finalized. All construction loans, frozen." A flicker of satisfaction passed over Mason's face. Riverside Heights had been Brendan's ill-fated attempt to compete with Mason's Riverside Plaza, the very site where Mason had nearly lost his life. Now, with funding frozen, the project would collapse in on itself. Oliver continued, barely keeping pace with the day's cascade of collapse. "His partners are panicking. Some have reached out to us about picking up the pieces." "We don't poach," Mason said with deliberate calm, "but we're always available when plans change." He signed the final permit. "Next quarter, if they still have anything left by then." Oliver hesitated before speaking again. "There's something else." Vanessa tried to force her way into the main office this morning. Mason looked up now. "Security held protocol, denied access, but she caused a scene. Claimed you were having a breakdown, said she needed your records to help coordinate medical care." Mason's jaw flexed. "She's unraveling. She might come here next. She won't get far." He nodded toward the security monitors. The building was blanketed with cameras, silent witnesses to her desperation. "But I won't be here long. The final phase begins tonight." Once alone, Mason switched feeds. His former home appeared on screen like a ghostly stage. Vanessa paced the living room, barefoot on the marble tiles, hair disheveled, movements erratic. The phone at her ear was clenched in a white-knuckled grip. "I don't care what it looks like, Mom. I need somewhere to stay," she snapped. "Yes, I know it's been years. No, Lily comes with me." "Of course she does." "Fine, fine." She ended the call with a fury and flung the phone across the room. It missed the edge of a crystal vase by inches, a vase Mason had given her for their anniversary. She didn't miss the second time. Her hand darted out, gripped the delicate glass, and hurled it into the fireplace, shattering it with a sound like breaking promises. Mason watched, unmoved. Everything in that house, every valuable piece, had already been replaced with replicas. The originals were safe, tucked away under Cornerstone's ownership, shielded from the coming fire. His phone vibrated. Roth. Subject B, Norwood just left attorney's office. En route to Subject A, ETA 15-minute on. Mason shifted to the exterior cameras and waited. The confrontation would be the final cut. 17 minutes later, Brendan Norwood's Jaguar pulled into the drive. He climbed out, hair askew, jacket wrinkled, the polish of power peeled away. Vanessa opened the door before he could knock. The shouting started immediately. "This is your fault," Vanessa's voice cracked through the stillness. "You said the paper trail was clean." "My fault?" Brendan stepped forward, incredulous. "You couldn't even keep your husband distracted. If you'd visited him in the hospital like a normal wife, maybe he wouldn't have started digging." "Don't you dare blame me. I followed the plan. You're the one with sloppy records. That's what got us caught." Brendan raked his fingers through his hair, pacing like a man already locked in a cell. "It's over. My investors are gone. Riverside Heights is dead." Mason leaned back in his chair, watching them like insects beneath glass. There was no satisfaction in it, just quiet inevitability. The trap had closed, and the ones who built it together were now tearing each other apart. Glass shattered, a sharp, crystalline explosion against drywall as Vanessa Reynolds hurled the ornate bowl with a snarl of rage, her breathing jagged, uneven. Moments before, she'd been seated in stunned silence on the foyer bench, the eviction notice quivering in her hands, her once manicured fingers curled around the edges like claws. But now fury had overtaken grief, and the living room bore the brunt. Lamps toppled, cushions flung, framed photos of a life she could no longer claim, cracked and face down on the hardwood floor. Across town, far from the chaos, Mason Hargrove sat in grim silence, the surveillance feed casting flickering light across his angular features. He watched his estranged wife's unraveling, not with triumph, but with the measured coldness of a man who had accepted long ago that compassion for certain people was a luxury he could no longer afford. Nothing irreplaceable remained in that house. Anything of real value, sentimental or otherwise, had been secured weeks prior. Her tantrum was just noise, an echo of desperation in the face of a justice long overdue. "Should we send someone?" Wanda Hargrove's voice was tight, her eyes narrowing as Vanessa kicked over a glass coffee table. Mason didn't look away from the screen. "No, let her break whatever's left. It's insured and meaningless." On cue, his phone buzzed, Terrence Walsh's name lighting up the display. "The judge approved the financial discovery motion," Terrence announced without preamble. "We now have full legal access to Brendan Norwood's business holdings and Vanessa's personal accounts. The insurance commissioner is coordinating with us." "Good," Mason said. His voice carried no inflection. "The eviction can be enforced as early as tomorrow," Terrence continued. "I advised Friday, for logistical ease." "Do it tomorrow," Mason replied, ending the call. "I want this done." Back on the monitors, Vanessa slumped in the middle of the wreckage, mascara streaks like war paint trailing down her cheeks. The woman who once glided through charity galas and school board meetings with calculated poise now resembled a ghost of herself, unmoored and unraveling. The clock read 8:07 a.m. when the sheriff's deputy had arrived, tall, stern, and impenetrable behind mirrored sunglasses. Vanessa's outrage had begun with shrill disbelief and quickly spiraled toward hysteria. "This is my home," she'd screamed, voice echoing through the foyer, captured clearly by the hidden microphones. "Ma'am," the deputy had replied, his tone practiced, flat. "This property belongs to Cornerstone Holdings, LLC, and by court order, your right to occupy it as a spouse has been terminated. You have 24 hours to vacate." After his departure, silence had fallen. Then the bolt had flown. Then the storm began. Meanwhile, across the city, Brendan Norwood was moving with the clumsy urgency of a man realizing the noose was tightening. Roth's discreet surveillance feed captured him rifling through a nondescript storage unit registered to a shell company. Mason had predicted this scramble. He'd funded extra security, new cameras, and off-duty cop under the guise of anonymous investment through Cornerstone. As Brendan yanked files from the shelves, Mason's phone pinged again. Roth's update, Subject B received notice, attempting to secure materials. Surveillance in place. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Wanda nudged the tablet closer. Lily's home. On screen, Lily Reynolds stepped quietly into the house, her school backpack slipping from one shoulder. Her face was pale, drawn, wary. The disarray hit her immediately, the shattered glass, the upturned furniture, her mother's broken sobs. She hovered in the entryway, eyes wide. "Mom, what happened?" Her voice was tentative, childlike. Vanessa whirled around, her rage momentarily doused by her daughter's arrival. "We're being evicted," she choked out. "Your loving stepfather decided we don't belong here anymore. We have until tomorrow morning." Lily froze, trying to comprehend the magnitude of what had just been dropped on her shoulders. "Where are we supposed to go?" "I don't know." Vanessa's tone was sharp, brittle, then softened as her daughter recoiled. "I'm sorry, honey. We'll figure it out. Just pack the essentials, clothes, your school things, anything important." "What about everything else?" Lily whispered, looking around at the remains of their life. "We leave it," Vanessa snapped, then sighed. "There's no time. No place to take it." Lily disappeared upstairs without another word, and Vanessa, wasting no time, snatched her phone. Mason split the screen, one feed showing Vanessa dialing in the trashed living room, the other revealing Brendan mid-frantic activity in the storage unit. When Brendan picked up, Vanessa cut straight to the point. "We're being evicted tomorrow morning. I need a place for Lily and me." Mason didn't need to hear the response. He could read it in Vanessa's face, the flicker of disbelief, the wounded pride waxed beneath tightening lips. "What do you mean you can't help?" she hissed. And in that moment, Mason saw it all fall into place. The empire of lies crumbling from the inside. No more alliances, no more lifelines, just wreckage. He leaned back in his chair, the silence of his command center like a bomb after so much noise. Tomorrow the locks would change. The house would be reclaimed. And he would finally begin building something untainted. On the ashes of betrayal, yes, but steady and his own. The mercy he might once have offered had died in that hospital room, with 6 words that had carved themselves into his bones. "You're not worth the gas money." The phone struck the wall with a sharp crack, splintering into a rain of glass and plastic. Vanessa's screams still echoed in the room, laced with betrayal and desperation. "Oh, I see," she spat, voice rising like a storm wind. "When everything was perfect, we were partners. But now that the ground's crumbling beneath us, I'm left to sink alone." Downstairs, Mason exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding and turned away from the wreckage of that conversation, fingers steady as he tapped his tablet screen to switch the surveillance feed. Upstairs, Lily was in her room, moving like a ghost through familiar routines, her back straight but shoulders trembling. A half-zipped suitcase lay on her bed. Slowly, deliberately, she folded clothes and tucked them inside. Jeans, a few worn sweaters, school books with corners curled from use. Silent tears streaked her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. Her mother's chaos had cracked like a whip. Lily's heartbreak was quieter, deeper, a grief with roots. Mason's gaze softened as he watched the teenager make choices with a clarity that seemed almost too adult. What she didn't take spoke volumes. The diamond earrings he'd given her for her 16th birthday sat untouched on the dresser. Designer handbags, high-end makeup kits, the newest tablet, pristine and irrelevant, were left behind without hesitation. Instead, she slipped a battered stuffed bear under her arm, tucked a leather-bound journal between folded jeans, and placed a small wooden box he knew it held letters from her grandmother, carefully between textbooks. Beside him, Wanda had been watching too. Her voice was quiet, knowing. "She's not like her mother." "No," Mason murmured, still staring at the screen. "She's not." His hand hovered for a moment before he pulled up the trust documents on his tablet. It took only a few taps to amend them, releasing a portion of the funds immediately. Enough for rent, groceries, choices. Not a solution, but a beginning. Not salvation, but freedom. He didn't flinch when Wanda's voice slid in again, equal parts incredulous and protective. "You're still helping her? After everything she said?" He met his sister's eyes, calm and resolved. "I'm not helping Vanessa. I'm giving Lily a chance. If she sides with her mother, so be it. The funds will wait for her until she's ready to use them. But she deserves the option to choose something better." Back on the monitor, Vanessa had finally begun to pack, though it was more performance than preparation. She tossed couture dresses onto her bed, surveyed her jewelry case like a dragon guarding its last hoard, and swept rows of lipsticks into an overnight bag. The difference between mother and daughter couldn't have been more stark. One was curating an exit, The other was trying to escape. By nightfall, Roth's update arrived. Brendan Norwood had been caught attempting to remove incriminating documents from a storage unit and was now in custody. Fraud investigators were circling tighter, his lawyer scrabbling for bail as if the law were just another negotiation. But the evidence was a noose, one Brendan had woven with his own hands. Meanwhile, Vanessa's social world had evaporated. Her attempts to rally support were met with frosty rejections, voicemails, and unread texts. The society crowd, once eager to sip champagne at her galas, now ghosted her entirely. The charity scandal had turned Vanessa Reynolds Hargrove from beloved philanthropist to untouchable pariah. At precisely 9:14 p.m., Mason's phone buzzed, a call from an unknown number. He didn't need to guess. Her phone was likely in pieces. She was probably using Lily's. He stared at the screen for a long second before answering. "Mason," came her voice, husky but crawling with that familiar saccharine undertone. "Thank God, I've been so worried about you." "Have you?" His voice was a blade wrapped in velvet. "Of course. After your accident, and then when you disappeared from the hospital, I've been beside myself. Where are you? We need to talk." "There's nothing left to say." "Don't say that," she pleaded. "I know you're upset about whatever lies you've heard or whatever you think you saw, but if you just come home, it's not your home," he cut in. Cold, final. It never was, and neither was I. The pause that followed was knife-sharp. When Vanessa spoke again, her words were laced with frost. "So that's it? 5 years and you're tossing Lily and me into the street? That's who you really are?" Mason didn't flinch. "You showed me exactly what kind of man I was in your eyes when you said I wasn't worth the gas money to visit in the hospital. When you hoped I'd either die fast or heal quickly so I wouldn't be an inconvenience." The silence now was heavier than anything she could throw. "That was, God, Mason, it was a mistake. I was under pressure. You know I didn't mean it. No, the mistake was mine, believing that you loved me, that we were building something. But I was just a rung on your ladder until you found a better one." Her tone turned desperate again. "Please, if not for me, then for Lily. Think of her." "I have. She's already been provided for. Tell her to check her email. There's a trust fund now. Living expenses included. It's for her, not you." This time the pause stretched long and venomous. When she finally responded, any trace of pretense had been burned away. "You son of a... You planned this. All of it. The house, the accounts, the prenup, everything." Mason's reply was calm, almost gentle. "Contingencies, Vanessa. I hoped I'd never need them." "You've ruined me," she hissed. "My reputation, my future, everything we built." He didn't even blink. "You were just along for the ride, looking for your next opportunity. And you found it. With Norwood. How's that going?" Her bitter laugh was jagged and humorless. "He's in custody, being grilled by investigators. He's no help now." Mason allowed himself the faintest smile. "Funny how that works." "What do you want, Mason?" Her voice cracked, peeled back to rawness. "An apology? You want me to grovel? Just tell me what it'll take to end this vendetta." He considered the question, truly considered it. "There's nothing you have that I want. Nothing you could give me." "Everyone has a price," she whispered, clinging to the last card she knew. "Not everyone," he said, voice low. "That's the part you never understood." There was a pause, then Mason added without anger. "The locksmith arrives at noon tomorrow to change the locks. I suggest you be gone before then." And he ended the call. He stared at the phone in his hand, unmoved. No triumph rose in him, no righteousness, just stillness. The kind that follows a storm after the last tree has fallen. Control, not over others, but over himself, had returned. Tomorrow, Vanessa would be gone. Soon after, the legal tide would continue sweeping away the debris she and Norwood had left behind. Mason Hargrove would still be standing, his company intact, his name unbroken. And Vanessa Reynolds, once a queen in silken secrets, would answer to the very truth she had tried to bury. She had sown a field of lies. Now the harvest had come. Cold morning light sifted through the skeletal branches encircling the safe house. gilding the floorboards in slats of gold. The wind whispered faintly through the eaves, as if the house itself were bracing for what lay ahead. Mason Hargrove had been awake since before dawn, his sleep haunted by fractured visions. The antiseptic glare of the hospital ceiling, Vanessa's venomous voice curling through a phone line, Lily's eyes blazing with contempt. Every echo pulled him further from rest. He stepped out of the shower, steam trailing behind him like a ghost. The ache in his ribs reminded him of each cracked bone, every betrayal embedded in flesh. As he moved into the kitchen, the rich aroma of coffee filled the silence. His loyal retriever, Brick, wagged his tail in slow, steady rhythm. "Just a few more hours, boy," Mason murmured, rubbing the soft fur behind Brick's ears. "Then we can go home." His phone buzzed, a terse update from the security firm overseeing the eviction. "In position, no movement at residence yet." Mason tapped into the surveillance feed. On screen, the house stood frozen in early light. Still, deceptively peaceful. But then, movement. Lily. She emerged from her bedroom dressed for departure. A rolling suitcase followed her like a reluctant companion. A backpack hung heavily on one shoulder. She paused briefly outside Vanessa's door, knocked with mechanical restraint, and moved on without waiting. In the kitchen, Lily made toast. No frills, no hesitation. She ate with the mechanical rhythm of someone clinging to control in a world unraveling at the seams. She rinsed her plate and dried it, a quiet act of order in chaos. Mason, watching, felt something shift. Not regret exactly, but a stirring awareness of the wreckage left in his wake. Not all of it avoidable, not all of it just. His phone rang again. Roth, always direct. "There's been a development," the investigator began. Vanessa reached out to Dennis Patterson last night, Lily's elusive biological father, the man in Seattle who sent extravagant gifts like guilt wrapped in ribbon, yet couldn't manage a visit. "How do you know?" Mason asked flatly. "I've had her email monitored since she trashed her phone. She sent him a long message, explained the situation, asked for help. He wrote back this morning, offered to take Lily, not Vanessa." Mason exhaled slowly. "And her response?" "She hasn't replied yet, but she doesn't have many options. Keep me posted." Mason ended the call and turned back to the feed. Vanessa had finally emerged, casually magnificent in tight designer jeans and a pale cashmere sweater, coiffed for sympathy, not survival, even now. She moved into the kitchen, poured herself coffee, and launched into an animated conversation with Lily, arms slicing through the air like a conductor orchestrating her own redemption. "You contacted your father last night?" Vanessa asked, voice honeyed with strategy. "He's agreed to take you in Seattle until this blows over." Lily looked up, brows arching. "Just me? What about you?" "I'll manage," Vanessa said breezily. "Stephanie might take me in for a few days." "Stephanie, from the Garden Society?" Lily blinked. "Didn't she just resign from your charity committee yesterday?" Vanessa waved a hand, dismissing reality like it was beneath her. "That was optics. She understands how the game works." "And what game is this?" Lily's voice was growing sharp. "Sending me to live with a father I barely know while you, what, chase down your next savior?" "Watch your tone, young lady," Vanessa snapped. "I'm doing what's best for you." "For me?" Lily barked out a brittle laugh. "You haven't done what's best for me since you dragged us into Mason's life. Everything's always been about your events, your image, your boyfriend." The slap cracked through the room like a gunshot. Lily's head snapped sideways, her cheek flushing red. The silence that followed was colder than any autumn breeze. "Don't you dare," Vanessa hissed. "Everything I've done was for us, for our future." Lily reached up, touched her cheek with trembling fingers. Her eyes, when they met Vanessa's again, had turned to ice. "No," she said softly. "Everything you've done was for you. Mason was right about you." Vanessa stiffened. Her voice dropped to a hiss. "When did you speak to Mason?" "He called me last night," Lily said. "After you went to bed. Told me about the trust fund he set up, for my education, for rent. Told me I don't have to follow you anymore." Vanessa's mask cracked. "You believe him? After what he's done to us?" "After what you did to him," Lily shot back. "I heard you, Mom, that day in the hospital. You told him to die fast or get better because you couldn't be bothered to visit. You were too busy with Brendan. You don't understand adult relationships. No, but I understand loyalty. Lily's voice trembled with rising fury. Mason never missed a school play or a parent-teacher conference. He helped me study, drove me to friends' houses, and I told him to die. The last words came out in a whisper broken by sobs. I told him to die because I thought I had to choose you. She stood there, tears streaming, her whole body shuddering with the weight of it. Vanessa said nothing. For once, no words came. Then slowly she straightened, composed herself, pragmatism kicking in like a reflex. This drama doesn't change anything. We're being evicted by noon. Your father is offering you a lifeline. Take it. Lily wiped her face. A new steel-lined calm settled over her. I'm not going to Seattle, she said. I'm using the trust fund to get an apartment near school. I'm finishing my senior year here. You're 17. You can't live alone. Watch me. She turned on her heel and walked upstairs. I already talked to Miss Winters. She's helping me find a place and file for emancipation. Watching the feed, Mason felt something shift. Not forgiveness for her words in that hospital call, but a rising recognition of her will, her strength, the same grit he'd felt at 17 when he swore he'd never be his father. Lily, too, had drawn her line in the sand. His phone buzzed again. Terrence Walsh. Mason, the lawyer said briskly. The judge signed the final injunction. Norwood properties, frozen. All assets locked. Brendan Norwood remains in custody. No bail. Passport flagged. Good, Mason said. And the divorce? On track, with everything we've gathered, infidelity, financial fraud. Vanessa has no ground to stand on. The tremble in Mason's hand as he ended the call was almost imperceptible, but the weight of what it meant thudded through him like a hammer striking concrete. The prenuptial agreement, long dismissed as a precautionary formality, had become his final safeguard. Terrence's voice had been steady, measured. It will be enforced. The legality was settled, but it was what came next that clenched in Mason's chest like a knot loosening after years of tension. The paperwork for the foundation is complete. Cornerstone's contribution cleared yesterday, and your associates' matching funds were wired this morning. It's official. The Hargrove Foundation will begin disbursements immediately. Mason stared at the surveillance feeds on the monitors before him, but his mind drifted to something beyond the glow of the screens. The sound of jackhammers, the scent of sun-baked lumber, the raw silence after the accident. From that wreckage, he had carved meaning. Injured construction workers and their families would no longer face the same spiral of vulnerability that had almost consumed him. This foundation, was the most personal brick in the structure of his comeback. Thank you, Terrence, he said softly, for all of it. He ended the call and leaned forward, elbows on the desk, eyes narrowing on the flickering screens. Lily appeared in one feed, pacing a room with a phone pressed to her ear, her face tight with concentration. No doubt she was speaking to the school counselor again, pushing forward with her emancipation. Mason admired her resolve, even as it reminded him of what had been broken. Another feed showed Vanessa in the master bedroom, rifling through drawers and garment racks like a thief looting her own life. Cashmere scarves, designer heels, and gold-trimmed clutches were shoved haphazardly into suitcases. She moved with desperate efficiency, a queen in exile, clinging to the remnants of a court that had long since turned its back. A ping signaled an update from the security team. 11:22 a.m. The moving truck had arrived. Two young men were helping her, faces Mason recognized from charity galas and donor parties, probably the last loyal remnants of her social sphere. He switched to the exterior camera. The men labored without complaint, loading boughs under Vanessa's sharp direction. Then Lily appeared at the threshold, dragging a battered suitcase and a frayed canvas backpack. She walked past her mother without a word and approached one of the young men directly. After a brief exchange, he nodded and placed her luggage not in the back with the rest, but carefully in the front cab. Separate, intentional. At 11:47 a.m., 13 minutes before the locksmith was scheduled to arrive, the truck pulled away. Vanessa followed in her silver Mercedes, her hair immaculate even in departure. Lily sat beside the driver in the cab, expression unreadable. Mason watched them go with an odd stillness. No elation, no bitterness, only the quiet, weighty click of a door closing on a chapter long overdue. He turned to Wanda, who stood silently behind him, keys in hand. "It's done," he said. 6 months later, Mason stood on the rooftop terrace of Riverside Plaza. The wind crisp against his face, the city sprawling beneath him like a canvas finally finished. The sky, clear and mercilessly blue, allowed Mount Hood to loom in the distance, white-crowned, unchanging. Below, workers dismantled the final scaffolds, their movements efficient, practiced. Cleanup crews swept the entryway for next week's grand opening. The building shimmered in the afternoon light, a testament in steel and glass. Diego stepped beside him, resting his forearms on the railing. His movements bore a lingering stiffness, a souvenir from the fall, but his eyes gleamed with life. "Quite a view," he said. "Worth all the trouble," Mason replied, allowing himself a breath of pride. Riverside Plaza was not just another Cornerstone development. It was the company's legacy, mixed-use towers with offices, high-end retail, housing, and a community center named after Mason's father, the man who had taught him how to hold a hammer and why it mattered. Diego glanced at his clipboard. "Final inspections are done, passed everything. First tenants move in next week. Every subcontractor trained in the new safety protocols. The Hargrove Safety Initiative is officially part of the handbook now." Mason nodded, the pride now tinged with something deeper. After his recovery, he'd poured himself into overhauling the very standards that had failed him. Partnerships, reform, accountability. The scaffold manufacturer had been held responsible. Industry-wide recalls followed. What once almost killed him now stood as a model. His phone vibrated. A message from Wanda. Just left the courthouse. Final divorce decree, signed and entered. "It's officially over." He stared at the screen. A strange, unexpected relief unfurled inside him, as if an invisible pressure had finally eased from his ribs. Vanessa's drawn-out legal tactics had failed. The prenup had held. The evidence had held. And now, nothing remained of her claim except a modest settlement, barely enough for a year of careful living, a skill Vanessa had never mastered. "Good news?" Diego asked. Mason tucked the phone away. "Just confirmation that the past stays in the past." They descended the stairs, heels echoing off polished concrete. As they moved through the lower floors, Mason's thoughts slipped to the man who had nearly undone everything. Brendan Norwood. The fraud had been far wider than anyone first suspected. Shell companies, false insurance claims, 3 years of deceit spun across multiple states. In the end, Norwood took a plea, turning over names for leniency. He was now 2 months into a 2-year stint at a minimum security prison. His business? Obliterated. His reputation? Unsalvageable. Vanessa had escaped criminal charges, barely. Her careful positioning and Brendan's reluctance to drag her down with him had spared her indictment. Perhaps the only noble thing Brendan ever did. Now she lived in Arizona, holed up with her disapproving mother and coordinating weddings at a mid-tier hotel. Wanda's occasional updates painted the picture clearly. Faded glamour, forced smiles, quiet desperation. The fall had been long, deserved. Mason hadn't spoken to her beyond legal necessities. The few letters she sent, wistful, manipulative, went unanswered. That woman who once wished him gone so she could get on with her curated life was now just a cautionary ghost. Lily had carved a different path. True to her word, she had petitioned for emancipation. With her counselor's help and quiet support from Terrence, she secured it. Mason arranged through careful channels that the trust fund remained available, ensuring she could live safely, securely. She found a small apartment near school, kept her grades steady, started applying to colleges. The quiet determination in her surprised him. 3 months after her departure, he received her email. "I don't expect forgiveness for what I said. There's no excuse good enough. But I want you to know I'm sorry." He had stared at the screen for a long time, not responding, not yet. But something in him, long hardened, had begun, just begun, to soften. He didn't forgive her, not truly, not deeply. Forgiveness would have required something Mason Hargrove no longer possessed, some remnant of softness, a sliver of naivete that hadn't been burned away by betrayal. What he offered instead was something quieter, sturdier, acknowledgement, a silent nod to the truth that people, even those born of chaos, could carve new paths. So when Lily Reynolds had written to thank him for the trust fund that gave me a chance to make my own choices, for seeing something in me worth saving, even when I didn't see it in you, he responded with calm finality. The trust would remain. Her future, unshackled from the wreckage her mother had wrought, would not be punished. It was enough. By late afternoon, the air outside Cornerstone's headquarters was thick with golden light, heavy with the scent of sawdust in progress. Mason stepped through the glass doors after a long inspection of the Riverside Plaza site, boots scuffed, shirt marked with faint streaks of concrete dust. Yet despite the fatigue, his bearing held quiet pride. In 6 months, Cornerstone hadn't just endured the scandal Brendan Norwood left behind. It had surged forward, powered by grit, reputation, and Mason's unrelenting discipline. 3 major contracts secured, industry accolades whispered his name with respect again, and the once skeptical business circles now circled back for a seat at his table. The Riverside Plaza's grand opening loomed, promising more than ceremony. It was vindication in steel and stone. In his office, he reviewed the final logistics, blueprints tucked neatly beside a folder stamped with the company seal. A knock. Heather entered with her usual composed energy. "Everything's set for next week, Mr. Hargrove," the mayor confirmed, "and press packets are ready for distribution." Mason nodded once. "Thank you, Heather. Any updates from the foundation committee?" "Yes, sir. First round of family support grants is out. 5 families, injured workers, will receive assistance this month." He allowed himself a rare smile. The Hargrove Foundation, seeded with Cornerstone profits and amplified by matching donations from long-standing allies like Victor Solana, was perhaps his proudest accomplishment. Not because of legacy or image, but because it built something stronger than concrete, dignity for those who might have been discarded, something he once lacked when he needed it most. As Heather left, Mason gathered his things. The house he returned to now bore no scars of the storm that had passed through it. The walls had been painted over, neutral earth tones replacing Vanessa's icy grays and gaudy accent pieces. The master suite was entirely redesigned, transformed into a space of warmth and solitude. Not a trace of her lingered. Brick greeted him at the door with a familiar bark, the chocolate lab's tail thumping hard against the floor. Loyalty without question. Mason clipped the leash, and together they walked into the evening hush, weaving through a neighborhood that had grown respectfully silent. No more sideways glances, no more hesitant condolences. Just quiet nods, the way men acknowledge other men who've walked through fire and come out cleaner for it. Later, whiskey in hand, Mason sat on the back deck. Brick curled faithfully at his feet as the sky bled into hues of lavender and rust. His phone buzzed, a final message from Roth. Final surveillance discontinued. All equipment removed from Reynolds' residence. Mason stared at the screen a moment before replying with a curt "acknowledged." He hadn't monitored Vanessa out of pettiness. The months after the separation had demanded vigilance, not sentimentality. With her relocated to Arizona, her chaos muted by distance and legal finality, there was no longer any need for precaution. The chapter had closed, for real, and for the first time in years, he felt the weightlessness of true freedom. Not the freedom of being alone, but of being unencumbered, of knowing exactly who he was and what he would never again allow. The love he once gave so freely had become guarded, his trust no longer a blank check for those with bright smiles and hungry eyes. What once was pain had hardened into clarity, a shield forged in betrayal. He remembered unbidden that moment months ago. Vanessa's shriek caught on Wanda's video, the desperate venom of someone realizing their games no longer worked. He took everything, even the dog. Mason exhaled a dry chuckle and leaned forward, scratching Brick gently behind the ears. "No," he murmured to the loyal creature. "I didn't take everything. I reclaimed what was mine. His pride, his peace, his goddamn future." Vanessa had only lost what she had tried to steal. And Brick, wise in the way of dogs, had always known which hand held truth and which held poison. The stars began to emerge above him, silent and cold. But Mason no longer feared the dark. Tomorrow promised new blueprints, fresh labor, more steel rising from foundation to skyline. He wasn't just surviving. He was building, smarter, steadier, unyielding. Some debts could never be repaid. Some wounds never stitched closed. But Mason Hargrove had found something more lasting than retribution. He had found the unshakable cornerstone of himself,